Bill, you're muted.
Okay, good. Just talking to Sarah, last minute coordination. Good morning, everybody. Anastasia will be joining us shortly. This is going to be a new experience, so bear with us.
I'll let you in on the secret that I'm the worship associate, so I'm the opening host, shall we say.
Yep, as soon as I hit the share here, I am off air audio-wise.
Good morning, everyone. It's Reverend Anastasia. I see Jane is here. Good morning. And Lana, and Judy, and Sandy, and Rick, and Roger, Nazreen, Patty, and John, and Carolyn, and Randy. Hello, good morning. So nice to see people in their homes doing well. And hey, Casey, good morning. Welcome. And let's see who else is going to join us this morning. Everyone comfy and have tea. Oh, hi, Diana. Good morning. We always go by Danny. And if you, looks like everyone has their names identified, but if you don't, then there's a little way to enter it. It's just the little names in the corners of our screen work as our name badges this morning. So I invite you to get comfy and settled in for our worship service, which will start right on time. Cindy's here. That's wonderful. Alan, good morning. Eva, hello. Good morning.
I love your scenic backgrounds, you guys.
It's really true. I have to say, someone's is my favorite. Oh yeah, Alan Schmidt always, and Randy. I don't know where you are, Randy, but I want to be where you are.
This is a personal photo from the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. It has azaleas and rhododendrons in the background. Beautiful. It's an option in Zoom that you can work on. You can pull up your personal photo for a background.
I'm at the base of Pikes Peak.
Pikes Peak, yes.
And where is that, Randy?
Colorado Springs area.
Oh, lovely.
But I wish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just went to Asheville before all of this, and so I'm glad I got some mountains in.
To Aspen, did you say, Casey?
Asheville, North Carolina.
Oh, Asheville.
Yeah. Beautiful and good eating.
What was your favorite thing that you ate?
Oh boy. That's hard. We had really good tacos at this taco place. That might have been my favorite. Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Bonnie. Good morning, Janet. Good morning, Jerry. Welcome. It's nice to have you with us here today. Hello, Ellen.
Hello.
Good morning, Greg. Good morning, Jason. Good morning, Abigail. Welcome.
So John and Jane are not going to show our pictures, okay?
Just a J. Judy's got her coffee.
Does this mean John and Jay still have their pajamas on?
No.
Hopefully.
You can't prove it, Jane. John won't let you.
That's right.
I've
Good morning,
taught online
Cindy.
for several years, and my favorite thing about it is that as long as I look businesslike from the waist up, nobody knows. I could be wearing my jammy pants. Nobody knows.
Good morning, Tandy. Good morning, Crystal. Good morning, Bruce. Good morning, Ollie. Good morning, Barb.
I see Eve Engel is on from North Carolina. Hello.
Ooh. Speaking of North Carolina.
Good morning, Rebecca. Good morning, Carol and Rick. Good morning, Marianne. It's so nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
I was just thinking about you last night, Rebecca. So this is,
Aww.
it's almost like omniscient or something. Good morning, Kathy. Good morning, Jenny. So in our service, you'll see that there's a chat function. So during the service, we'll ask that you remain muted so that way we don't have to worry about background sound issues. But you'll have explicit opportunities to chime into the conversation using the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer or smartphone. And then the other thing, and so I invite you to read through those or to, you could comment as you like. It's also a place, if you're having any technical difficulties, that you could chime in, and Nazreen should be monitoring that and help you sort of solve any technical difficulties. And then the only other thing that you might want to do is at some point, we might give you an option to go to gallery view and to see each other's faces, or during that time to simply scroll through if you have a little bar on the side of your screen to see people. And because I just think it's so wonderful to really gather and see each other's lovely faces, even when we're not in the same sanctuary together. And other than that, we should just be able to take you through the service. And Bill, I think it's time actually.
Good morning. Welcome to our Sunday service. It is so good to see so many of you here gathered through Zoom and more joining through Facebook on Sunday morning, March 29th, 2020. I am Sandy Reed Ryberg, serving as your worship associate this morning, and I hope that we find you safe and healthy, and that we can share some thoughts this morning that might bring light and encouragement during a very unusual time in our lives as we all adjust to the changes brought about through the coronavirus pandemic. What keeps me encouraged is the connection through electronic media, as well as more traditional methods in a time of isolation. As my husband and I step outside each day and walk through the neighborhood, I see daffodils and crocus and robins and woodpeckers and budding trees and green grass. All of this and connecting with you today brings me hope. We invite you to bring into this space your whole self and your full identity, especially your questioning mind and your expansive heart. We welcome you and those you love. Here, you can share your lived experience, your questions, your hopes, and your struggles. All Souls is a congregation that is united by our covenant, which reminds us that we share a mutual commitment to one another. We invite you to join us in putting love into action, to change ourselves and the world for the better. We are engaged in free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and we rely on a variety of traditions and sources of wisdom in that search. At this time, please join me in reciting together our covenant, which hopefully you will see lighted on our screen as we light our chalice to begin before we speak the covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. We now have a hymn.
Sandy, you're muted, sweetheart.
Thank you. I thought it says my speaker is not working now. Okay.
We can hear you okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. As a child at All Souls, the only time that I remember missing church during the school year was when my sisters and brothers and I were sick with measles and chickenpox. There were 5 of us, and we had these 2 afflictions back to back and in sequence. So my poor mother was out with intense nursing duties for almost 2 straight months. Our mother's care was amazing during this time, but there were many others who helped her and provided her with what she needed to nurse her children through their illness. I remember neighbors and church friends bringing food, and doctors and nurses making house calls to check on us. Friends shared their advice on how to get through the illness and gave tips for making care as easy as possible. And our dad, even though he was going to work each day, also pitched in the evenings to give Mom a moment to rest and recharge. So it was the assurance that she was not alone, that help could be counted on, that kept her spirits lifted through enough to not crumble under the pressure of caring for children with illness. With the coronavirus, we face a similar time, and generosity is again needed. Generosity, of course, to our All Souls family, also to those beyond our covenantal community. Today, Reverend Anastasia is going to share the true story of the Salwin family who, with great care and deliberation, drastically changed their lives to give and to live more generously. I needed this message at this time as an example not only of how to protect myself and my family, but also how to think of others in our community that may only survive if someone shares with them. Let's express our celebration together this morning by looking for and showing generosity in our own lives.
Good morning, everyone. It's Reverend Anastasia. I am so glad that you're joining us today. And I want to tell you a story. So one of the great stories or understandings, theological understandings, answers the question of why do sometimes people make good choices and why do sometimes people make not so good choices. And because it's easier for us to understand this question by thinking about who are we listening to, like sometimes we listen to our friends or our families, and when we talk about religion or faith, sometimes we talk about other sources that we're listening to. And one of the one way that people for a long time have been talking about these sources is that when we make good choices, kind choices, generous choices, that we've been listening to what some call God. And that when we make cruel choices or mean choices or selfish choices, we might be listening to what the devil is saying. And there is a story that one of my colleagues, the wonderful David Bumbaugh, talked about how some people began to make bad choices. Once upon a time, long, long, long before any history began, the devil was trying to figure out how to get people to make bad choices. He sent an apple and a snake into the Garden of Eden to try to convince people to make bad choices. But the people just shared the apples and talked to the snakes, and that did not cause them to make bad choices. He sent pestilence and war, thinking that violence or fear would cut people to make bad choices. But that didn't work either. So the devil thought for a really long time, how can I bring down humanity? How can I wreck this perfect little thing that they've got going? And just so happened about that time, the devil went into a maker space, a kind of creative space to kind of get a hands-on approach to this problem. And wouldn't you know it, the devil created the perfect device. Would you guys like to see it? You would, all right. It is a back scratcher. Yep, now these little tenacious devices can be bought for just 99 cents in your local CVS, things like that. And you might wonder, this doesn't look so scary. How can a back scratcher create so many problems for people? Well, it just so happens that this piece of wood, nicely bent at the end, is just so designed to get that one little unreachable spot just there between the shoulder blades, a little lower, now a bit up, where that persistent itch always takes up resistance. Now, it's just an itch, you say. That's not such a big deal. How is scratching that itch the source of us making bad choices? Well, I'll tell you. Before the back scratcher, this simple, infernal device, we depended upon each other. We could not simply do for ourselves. We would have to say, will you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours? And we began to be mutual, to ask for help, to depend on each other, to be appreciative of when someone came and helped us out a little bit. But once we had the back scratcher, we didn't need anyone else. And we no longer had to rely on the ties of communities. In fact, we thought we were self-sufficient. That means we thought we could just take care of everything we need ourselves. So the story goes by David Bumbaugh that one day in the Garden of Eden, God was walking along and saw a primate standing alone. Now, this primate was a human being. And God saw this human being standing alone. And God said, what have you done that you stand alone? And the primate answered, I have found a back scratcher, and now I need no one. God said, poor dear, now you must leave this garden, for in Eden no one stands alone. Each depends upon the others. And thus human beings began our wandering of the earth, where we would scratch our own itches, pretend to need no one, and vaguely remember back and yearn for those days when our itches would be scratched by a gentle, loving ant instead of a cold sick. So as we go forward in our lives, particularly in these times when we're all recognizing the effects of the coronavirus, let's not pretend that we can be self-sufficient and stand on our own. And nor let us just think about scratching our own itches, but let's remember back how to ask for help, how to say, I need help, how to offer help, and be appreciative that we're truly meant to be together as a community. Thank you. Good morning, dear ones. In this time when we are gathered in light of the pandemic crisis, the corona pandemic crisis, and many of us are sheltering in home, I want you to know that my prayers and thoughts have been with each of you, and I know that you have been holding each other in your hearts as well. At this time, when there is a lot of fear and wonder, and sometimes curiosity at what is ahead, I am reminded that the most common phrase to be found in the Bible is do not be afraid. It appears more than 1,200 times. Again and again, the Holy One and members of the community would say, do not be afraid. I hope that word of assurance speaks to you now. We've been reaching out and calling many of our members, and we wanted to share with you that the good news is so far we have not found a member of our community whose health, physical health, has been directly affected by the coronavirus. And so today we want to remember and lift up a prayer of intention for how we could draw our circle wide to include those beyond ourselves, even beyond our congregation, and those in our larger metro area. And so this reading by Cameron Belm is offered with that intention. May we, who were merely inconvenienced, remember those whose lives are at stake. May we, who have no risk factors, remember those most vulnerable. May we, who have the luxury of working from home, remember those who must choose between preserving their health and making their rent. May we, who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close, remember those who have no options. May we, who have canceled our trips, remember those who have no safe space to go. May we, who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market, remember those who have no margin at all. May we, who settle in for a quarantine at home, remember those who have no home. As fear grips our country, let us choose love. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways of being love in action towards our neighbors. Amen. I'll invite you to sing along as you choose to hymn number 101, Abide With Me. Verses 1 through 3 will be appearing on your screen. Dear ones, when I have been stressed or overwhelmed, there's a reading that I return to, a reading by Wendell Berry. And I invite you to take a deep breath. And as you release your breath, to try to release all that you're holding on to. All that you're holding on to with fear or concern or worry. And may you surrender simply into being. I offer you the peace of wild things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Amen. Will you join us in singing Spirit of Life? The lyrics will appear on your screen. In our hymnal at the back, we have a glorious set of readings. So if you ever have a moment when you're looking for some spiritual resources, I suggest buying your own copy of Singing the Living Tradition. And in the back, you might just find what you've been seeking for. Today's reading is by the great Unitarian minister and public figure, Ralph Waldo Emerson. A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think that our tribute is paid in secret in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will out. That which dominates our imagination and our thoughts will determine our lives, our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming.
Woo!
it's so wonderful to hear the music of our community again. So today's sermon I had picked, about 6 or 7 months ago. I knew we would be near the end of our pledge drive, and there was a story of generosity that involved the Salwin family that I just thought, this is such a wonderful story and will make such a great sermon. And I will share and confess that when we had our worship planning call with our worship team, our worship associates and musicians and other staff and tech folk, John Murphy shared with me something which I needed to hear, which is he said, I've been talking to our members, and sometimes there are a few of us who feel that we're not sharing messages that are just like really speaking to the current moment. And that might be something you want to consider. How is this sermon really speaking to this time of pandemic? And I shared with him that I acknowledge that's really true, that I have tried to pick messages that are relevant to living our lives in a larger way, and that can meet us perhaps on multiple different levels. So that way they're not relevant, even though I'm not directly addressing the topic or the crisis or the event that's on top of everyone's mind. I would share, John provided me another great insight during our shared pulpit class on Thursday. Everyone in the class prepared a short little message, and about half the class talked about the pandemic. It was a really meaningful moment for me and for the other people to really hear what we were thinking about, what concerned us, where we were finding connection or relief or acceptance. I hope that you take the opportunity in the weeks ahead to share those stories with one another. We'll be offering other moments online for you to share, and I hope you take one of them up. But John Murphy's in particular was really helpful. He shared this wonderful little story that he had been reading the UU World magazine that he hadn't gotten to and that had been produced prior to this pandemic hitting the United States. And all the articles just seemed not relevant to him. And then he went and did some inner reflecting about really how much this pandemic was going to change our lives in America and change patterns of lives, and how the collective loss will always stay with us. And thinking about that, and thinking about the humanness of that, he went back and reread the UU World magazine and saw in there messages that were timeless and that were relevant even in this time of pandemic. It was really useful for me because I will confess, as I shared, that when I planned this sermon originally, it was to be in support of our pledge drive. And it was John's story was a useful reminder that I needed to provide you guys with a message that far exceeded our immediate needs, and that perhaps even exceeded the pandemic itself. One of the things the reason why I chose the Salwin family story, which I'm about to share with you, is because when I first read it, and even when I selected it for the main story in this sermon, it seemed a story of extraordinary generosity, a story that would challenge us into how to live with one another. One day, 14-year-old Hannah Salwin was in a car with her father, and they were stopped at a stoplight under the bridge. When Hannah looked out the window to the right, she saw that there was a homeless person carrying a cardboard sign asking for help. And when she looked out the window to the left, she saw a very expensive Mercedes. Why, she wondered aloud to her father, couldn't the person to the left of them, couldn't that person have a cheaper car so the person to the right of them have enough to eat? Kevin, Hannah's father, agreed that she had a good point. But he said even the car that they were driving was certainly beyond that which many people could afford. Now, for many people, including probably in my own family, that's where the conversation would have ended, but not for Hannah. Now, Hannah had this passion for justice that just wouldn't quit. So, in the spirit of democracy, through which we raise Unitarian Universalists, she brought the question to her family: why did they have so much when others had so little? Her parents and family responded by mentioning some of the things that the family did. They volunteered for Habitat for Humanity. And Hannah's mom left a really high-paying job to work as a teacher. Together, the family delivered food through Meals on Wheels. The kids were required to set aside a third of their allowance to buy groceries to the homeless. Weren't they doing enough? And then Joan, Hannah's mom, threw out an idea that was only halfway a joke. Shouldn't they sell their beautiful, historic mansion in which they lived and get a smaller, cheaper house and then give away the rest of the money from the sale? This turned out to be a dangerous idea. Hannah fell in love with it immediately. Yes, that's exactly what they should do. Sell the house, use half of the money to buy a home, half the size, and give away the other half of the money. At first, Hannah's brother Joe thought that this idea was ridiculous. Why would they want to move out of a house that was the envy of all their friends? And Kevin and Joan had to think long and hard about the decision that would have such a big impact on their family's finances. But Hannah kept pushing. It was something they could do, something they should do. So through a whole series of family meetings in which each person got an equal vote, they began to decide not only to sell their lovely home, but also through which they figured out what to do with their money. They researched the ideas and the needs that existed around the world, and they decided that their money could make the biggest impact in Africa. They researched organizations working to make life better for people in different parts of that continent. The Salwins wanted to work with an organization that supported people in making their own lives better, not one that just went in and helped poor people without ideas and effort from the people that they were helping. The family traveled to meet with officials from 4 different organizations and ended up choosing the Hunger Project, which helped villagers in Ghana to build community service centers. In the meantime, as things have it, the project got harder than anyone expected. The housing market took a sudden drop, the economy tanked, and no one wanted to buy the Salwins' home for anything close to the $1.6 million they'd been expecting for it. You guessed it, it was 2008. But see, the Salwins had already committed $800,000 to the Hunger Project, and they didn't want to go back on their word. When their house eventually sold, there was a gap of $300,000 between what they had promised and the money that they had available. They did not want to disappoint this community to which they had developed a relationship and a commitment to. The day was saved when a publisher agreed to pay them $380,000 for the rights of a book that Joe and Hannah would write about their experiences. That book I recommended to you, it's called The Power of Half, and it talks about the journey the family went through as they figured out their life-changing gift. It talks about the literal journey to Ghana that they took and the project that unfolded. But more, it talks about how their family changed for the better when they all caught Hannah's fire to make a difference. Now, again, when I found this story, I thought this is a story of extraordinary generosity. But what I've come to realize, in part through John's gentle reminders, is that I needed to actually even question the framework of that. I began to go back to the work of Sebastian Junger, who wrote a book called Tribe on homecoming and belonging. Junger, in his book, looks at how human beings evolutionarily developed and how our brains are hardwired for tribal thinking. Tribal thinking, you said, what is this tribal thinking? Well, tribal thinking is thinking about belonging to a tribe and placing the tribe identity as even above one's individual identity. The whole concept of individual identity is actually quite new to human beings. And the significant things about tribes are, they are for you and you are for them. They are for you and you are for them. Now, you might say, doesn't that belong in a different era or something quite outside our life in the United States now? And Junger points out something really interesting. He says, we go back to tribal thinking anytime humanity faces a significant man-made or natural calamity. He quotes the work of Charles Fritz, who studied the effects of bombing on London and Germany during World War II. And Fritz developed a theory, a broad theory about social resistance. He says that he was unable to find a single instance where communities hit by catastrophic events lapsed into sustained panic, much less anything approaching anarchy. If anything, Fritz found that social bonds were reinforced during disasters, and that the people overwhelmingly devoted their energies towards the good of the community rather than just themselves. We are in the midst of a kind of calamity. As I've watched the news headlines, I took time yesterday to meditate, to lament, to grieve the 2,000 and more American lives that have been lost in this pandemic. And more, that lament helped me commit myself forward to trying to protect the lives of those around me, near and far. But what does this tribal thinking have to do with the story of the Salwins and Hannah? Junger says that in tribal communities, there exists a great equality, a great willingness to provide for all, not just for oneself. In those times, tribal communities are often migratory. And so anything that kind of belonged to oneself had to be something that you or perhaps a pack animal could easily carry. Anything beyond that, one could literally not possess. Tribes cared about only a truly few things. They cared about that you did no harm to anyone else within the community, that you were loyal and did not assist any tribe in doing harm to your tribe. And 3, they cared a great deal about mutuality and reciprocity. The way that one experienced belonging and acceptance and homecoming in a tribe was was through acts of contribution. When you collected food, you shared that food. When you found water, you shared that water. What Junger's work helps me realize is that in a society today, we have a framework of generosity versus a framework of contribution. When I think about generosity, I think about these inspiring stories of people who selflessly gave of what they had. But really, in our tribal thinking, the Thalwyn story is simply a story of contribution. Of course they gave what they had. Of course they shared everything beyond which they needed to survive. These days, I invite us all to think about how to contribute versus how to be generous. Generosity is thinking about what you can, what doesn't pain you to give away, stretching yourself as if a journey of generosity is an unnatural journey, something you have to learn. Where story of contribution recognizes that we gain significance by living as one for all and all for one. So my dear ones, I invite you to remember that the way that we gain significance and meaning is through contribution. I invite you to think about who you want to be in discussion with this. Perhaps who in your family you'd like to have a meeting with, or who among your friends you'd like to have a meeting with. To really think about what your values are, what you have to contribute, what you no longer need to sustain for yourself. And then think about how to make those contributions, particularly in this time when it's so clear that we must live, survive or not survive with one another. May you find your contributions to provide you with blessings. May it be so, and amen. We've come to say that love and action is at the heart of our congregation. I know that I've experienced this, both within our walls and beyond our walls. There are times that we have shown up to stop constitutional bans on marriage, when we have gone and marched for hunger, when we've supported people going to do refugee work in Syria and many others. So today I want to give you 2 minutes to think about how you know this to be true for All Souls. I invite you to reflect on how you have witnessed or experienced All Souls putting love in action beyond our congregation, towards our planet, or towards those in our wider community. I invite you now to think about what you saw, when you saw it, what people were doing, what you heard being said, what you experienced inside you when you witnessed it. I invite you to begin your time of reflection, and then in about 1.5 minutes, you'll see a screen popped up a screen prompt come up that will invite you to share your reflections publicly or privately with us.
Hello, my name is Nasreen Khan. I'm the coordinator of programs and communication here at All Souls. If you haven't yet, I invite you to fill out a connection card. This link is being shown on your screen or will be shown on your screen. This is an opportunity to connect in an especially important way in this time of virtual community. We all have to be a little bit more intentional because we don't have the same opportunities for the informal but significant connection that in-person attendance and in-person connection allows. For first-time guests, we would appreciate the opportunity to send you a gift of appreciation for your presence with us here today. So please share your mailing address as well as your email. When you complete your connection card, I'd love to share with you a handful of responses from our chat board. So for those of you listening in and unable to see the chat, some of the ways that people have seen All Souls put love in action outside our walls and in the greater community is through our interfaith hospitality network that houses homeless families in houses of worship throughout the city. A new visitor says that we put love in action by genuinely welcoming new visitors like herself. Another congregant has said, our congregation embraces the Freedom School and has shown up financially for the Freedom School in the last few years. The courageous performances in the Laramie Project and other arts-based ministries have been a way of showing love in action. And household donations collected during the holidays for domestic violence shelters, as well as the food pantry housed in our basement. I think another way of All Souls communing in love and action has been by participating in the Pride Parade and just in our general support of LGBTQ communities. We've also had 20,000 calls made from our All Souls phone bank to pass an expansion of mass transit. And also, as well, our multi-year commitment to making All Souls eligible to be a green congregation. Thank you all for your work on that. In that vein, we've placed solar panels on our church rooftop to reduce our carbon footprint. And I would add to all of your responses that this call with so many participants is a way that I feel loved. It's not outside of our community, but the willingness to gather on a Sunday morning when you all could be watching Netflix is a way of showing community and of being in connection with one another. Further responses include running trainings on how to protect our neighbors from ice raids, and the numerous Faith in Indiana events our members help support and lead. Thank you all for your willingness to share and bless each other with your experiences. I want to remind you that we'll be going straight into our virtual coffee hour directly after the service ends. So you'll see an invitation on your screen for a breakout room, which is a smaller virtual room where small group, more intimate conversation can happen. And I invite you all to stay and be in conversation for a while after the service. Thank you.
Each week, we share half of the marked funds given in our Sunday collection to a purpose that reflects our UU values. Today's collection will support the Ministerial Discretionary Fund, which exists to assist people who find themselves unable to meet normal financial needs due to illness or setbacks or loss of income. This fund will be particularly helpful at this time, as many hourly workers in our city have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus pandemic. I know personally of the relief experienced when help through this fund provided someone I know with rental assistance. Your generous contribution this morning through the link provided, which will be shown again on your screen shortly, will make it possible to extend help today to someone who is wondering how the lights will stay on or how food will be purchased. This is also the time of year when our All Souls Board of Trustees develop a budget for the operations of our community and facilities starting in our fiscal year in July. As Reverend Anastasia mentioned, our annual pledge drive is in progress. To decide how much we are able to direct to our justice-making efforts or to our lights or Sunday morning music or to ensuring that we can provide benefits to our staff, we need each of our members to pledge. Pledging is one of the most significant acts of membership. Through it, you individually have a voice and demonstrate mutual responsibility as well as individual contribution. This pledge is how you indicate your support of how we are putting love into action towards each other and toward the wider Indianapolis community. When my husband and I talked about our financial commitment, we talked first about how All Souls fits into our lives, and that guided us on how it fits into our budget. You see, for me, since my childhood, this church represents an unbroken link to the broader community. And one of the reasons I chose my husband was that he too had been raised as a Unitarian. This is why our time and treasure is generously given to support All Souls. I ask you to do the same reflection when you consider your gift to All Souls. Normal times you hand in your pledge card, but with our building closed, we ask that you make your pledge using the links that will be displayed. Thank you for your generosity in supporting our congregation and for your contribution. Let us now receive our morning offering.
My dear ones, there is a tremendous opportunity to see how we are living for each other right now. When you go out and you see the empty streets, the empty stadiums, the empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, it looks like the end of the world. What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our grandparents, for our immunocompromised siblings, for people we will never meet. People will lose jobs over this. Some will lose their businesses, and some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk or on your way to the store or just watching the news to look into the emptiness and marvel at all of that love. Let it fill you, sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It is a remarkable act of social solidarity. Perhaps us waving to each other across the street is the most profound act of love and witness, love in action that we will witness in our lifetimes. In recognition of how we live for one another, I invite you to sing with us hymn number 123, We Would Be One. The lyrics will appear on your screen.
Singing, I am
Thank you, everyone.
For those asking, the virtual coffee hour is in a separate Zoom invitation. I'll go ahead and paste that into the chat. I do believe it was also sent out.